welcome back to another episode of Blueprints and Bytes. Ajoy, I'm starting to get a complex here. I've just spent some time down in Texas, of all places, and I was in the Dallas Fort Worth airport, and someone comes up to me and says, "Are you John Flynn?" I'm like, "Yes, I am. This is the first time this has ever happened to me. This is brilliant." He says, "Are you on that podcast with Ajoy?" I'm like, really, come on. Well, can I just get one, right? So here I am. I am the co-host, underling, and understudy to my partner in crime, Ajoy. Ajoy, welcome to your show.
Thank you, John. No, you're a celebrity, and I know that for a fact. So I know who John Flynn is, and it is a pleasure, and working with you and doing this podcast series with you. Today we have a really great speaker, somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, Frank Stasiowski. Frank, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Ajoy. Good afternoon, John. How you doing, guys?
Excellent.
Excellent. Excellent. Very excited for this conversation, Frank.
And Frank,
So am I.
you're the CEO of PSMJ. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about your background, your organization, and kind of a little introduction about yourself?
Well, per that introduction, I'm not a celebrity like John, so we'll have to give John a kudo for that one. But PSMJ has been around for 50 years. We started this company back in the 70s, keeping track of the design and construction industry. So we do benchmark studies, collect data, a lot of content. We write newsletters, train about 5,000 architects and engineers around the world every year. And we've got about 130 people in our company doing that on a global basis, specifically just for the architects, engineers, and contractors of the world.
Nice. And
Wow.
looking at this, right, past, present, future, right, what has driven your passion in this industry so far?
Well, we live off the principles that we started back in the 70s. And our primary principle is that we're here to improve the success of design and construction businesses across the world. That's what we do. So we look at all aspects of the business. And over the years, we've done a bunch of things. I mean, we had the largest computer tech trade show for architects and engineers back in the 80s. It was the AEC System Show with 30,000 attendees every year and lots of high tech. And what's going on right now is very interesting relative to tech. Every 10 years, I write a futures book and I do predictions on what's going to happen 10 years out. In 1919, I wrote my latest book, Impact 2030. And in that book, I predicted we'd have a major economic setback sometime in the next 10 years, followed by the roaring 20s. Well, I had no idea that COVID was going to be the setback, but no doubt we had a little bit of a setback, but now we're roaring. And every architecture, engineer, and contractor in the world is booming right now. But lots is going to happen in the next 10 years relative to how technology is going to impact the professions. So that's what we're talking about an awful lot right now, is how technology is going to impact the future of the business of design and construction.
I'm sure. And it's such a fascinating topic. And then after the show, what I'm going to ask you to provide with me is the lottery numbers for the next drawing there, because you seem to have predicted that dip to the roaring 20s perfectly well. So well timed. I want to pick on something that you said in the beginning as well, that you've been training architects over multiple decades here. How has that process changed? So, as you said, technology has changed the way we design, has changed the way we build, has even changed materials that we build with. How has that affected the training aspect of it as you've gone through these thousands of architects that you train?
Well, it's very interesting because we started out in the 70s doing project management training for architects and engineers. And back then, everything was paper. It was all, take notes on pads, take your notes back, make a slimy Xerox copy of the notes if anybody needed them, hope that it didn't fade by the time it got to them, all that kind of stuff. So obviously, technology has impacted that. But most recently, I mean, back in the, I'd say around 2015, we started doing what I would call virtual training, online training all over the world, because the technology had advanced. And we started doing literally video recordings of training. And then we started doing interactive video recordings of training. When COVID hit, our business actually got busier because when COVID hit, we had the capacity. We got a studio, we had the capacity to do online training, and people obviously didn't want to get together in a room. So they all went online. And what's very interesting is the boundaries that were created by physical space were eliminated. We used to be able to fit 30 people in a seminar room and do a training session. Suddenly, we could fit 300 people on Zoom. And my whole staff wanted to lower the prices for training. I said, no, we need to raise the prices. We're saving everybody money. So we put our prices up and got a global audience, and training became global. And we're still doing it. We still do about half of our training right now globally on a virtual basis through the technology that you're using here and the technology that is available on other platforms. Teams, we use Teams every day, Ajoy. It's just one of those things, that Microsoft happened to create that is a great tool. So that's how it's changed the training business.
That's awesome, Frank. And you talked about your book, you talked about predictions. Any insights you can give us about some predictions about what you're seeing now and what's coming?
Well, it's interesting. You and I have chatted in the past, but the big news right now across the world is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And the entire world is talking about artificial intelligence, not only in the design and construction space, but in everything. You go out and buy something, and the next thing you know, you've got 24 emails selling you alternatives online to what you just purchased online. So artificial intelligence has been around. Many people don't realize it's been around for 20 years. And it's just now becoming public and marketable in ways that are unheard of. In my book, one of the interesting things I said is, we talked about artificial intelligence and how it might change design and constructing because it might replace a lot of mundane tasks. But what's going to impact the profession even more is quantum computing. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but let me finish up with artificial intelligence first. When you look at the application of artificial intelligence, some of the boundaries within the architecture and engineering and construction business is the mindset of the owners of the businesses. We still tend to do things in design and construction the way they were done 1,000 years ago, with drawings and specifications and building departments that are antiquated, dealing with laws and rules that were set up 50 years ago. So changing things within the design and construction business is a very slow process. The use of artificial intelligence means that you can reuse things, compare databases that have been around for decades and do it instantaneously almost. And the hard part in the architecture and engineering business right now is that there aren't a lot of commercial applications available right now for architects and engineers to use. There are more in the construction business. Somehow technology is being adapted in the construction business faster than it is in the architecture and engineering business. And that's probably because the economics of technology make more sense in construction. The use of drones, the use of survey equipment that's all electronic and digital right now, capturing data, using data, comparing data, much more in construction than there is in design right now. However, I want you to think about the application of artificial intelligence. An example that I use all the time is, the structural engineer. Mm-hmm. The question is, could you replace structural engineers with artificial intelligence? Well, let me define structural engineering a little differently, and then we'll see if you think we might do so. And I'll give you a thought challenge. If we reduce structural engineering to data, and we have a client that wants a mile-long bridge across a river for traffic, and they give you a specification of 8 lanes, and they tell you it's going to be an uncovered bridge, 8 lanes, a mile across a river. We now have all the criteria that the client wants. Give me all the alternatives of all materials that can be made out of. So let's take a computer and input all the characteristics of concrete, steel, glass, paper, plastic. How about, popsicle sticks, anything you want, put them all in the computer. Now let's take and put another requirement on the design and say that it needs to be a worldwide design award-winning bridge. So let's take a database and put every project that's ever won a design award in the world into a database. And now let's have artificial intelligence sort through all the data, all the structural calculations for each material, all of the requirements of the client, and all of the criteria that we've given it, and the databases that are available. Quickly give me 5 alternatives. Within 60 seconds, artificial intelligence today can give you 5 alternatives. So why do we need the structural engineer? Well, the engineers would argue, and if you're listening to this, structural engineers, you would argue that judgment comes into play. Well, judgment does come into play. You get to pick one of the 5, and you get to eliminate the 5,000 hours of billable time it used to take to do this calculation. So I firmly believe that we can eliminate an awful lot of mundane activity with engineers, architects, environmental scientists, and everybody else as artificial intelligence evolves.
I agree. I agree. I agree very strongly with that statement as well. But I also there's a counter to that as well, and especially in something that can be as personal as design, right? So when we look at architectural design patterns, there are architects that are celebrities, and people want properties by those celebrities, and it's got their touch to it, right? Whether it's a residential or a commercial building. Do you think there is a risk of an over reliance on an efficiency play by using AI across the entire architectural design stack that loses that personal touch, if you would, of this celebrity architect that wants to come in and they only build with this material or they only build in this style, whatever? Do you think we lose that eventually down the road when it becomes diluted out into put all the variable permutations in a database, query it, and give me design drawings back?
Well, give me a year in the future, John, because my favorite movie of all time is 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which Hal, if you remember the computer, used judgment to throw the human off the spaceship. Judgment that the human was challenging their decisions, their logic, and their opinions. So at a point in time in the future, I can see that the computer might have what we would call creativity built into its database. And that's going to happen as we're able to speed up the process and offer more alternatives faster with bigger databases. Now, introduce quantum computing, something nobody's talking about yet. In my book, I said that by the year 2030, quantum computing would be marketable. Now, for those of you that are listening to this podcast, quantum computing has the power of 360 to 400 times the computing power of the fastest computers today. So now let's take what artificial intelligence can do in 30 seconds and multiply it times 400 with databases that have 4 or 5 more years worth of data input to them. And the sortability will be unbelievable. I'm not sure our human brain will be able to act as fast as quantum computers. So my answer to your question, John, would be in the future, there will come a time when judgment will be handled by computers. There'll also come a time, and I'll make another bold prediction here for those of you that are architects and engineers today. Sorry about the sun coming on my head here. Can't get out of that one. But another bold prediction for you. And that is, we talk about liability as an obstacle, the liability of using a computer for calculations or design. At a point in the future, the computer will be more reliable than human judgment when it comes to liability. So liability insurance companies may not be needed if we're using computers that are reliable, because the computer can be trusted more than the human. Boy, is that a bold prediction.
It is. What do you think? Write it. Well, you don't have to write it down. We recorded it. The computer overlords have it. I think so. Again, that in examples that are very insurance and liability is a great example of a condition that is well defined must be met to its full capacity, and therefore a judgment can be made or for or against, right?
Right.
But when we look at architecture through the lens of beauty, for example, right? So now you've got a subjective judgment. So how do we then have our HAL 9000 making a subjective judgment, but is going to please the majority of folks that have to sit and look at this thing as they drive to work every day? If we still drive to work, we may fly. Maybe the Jetsons had it right. We don't know, right? How does that come into the equation, Frank?
Well, you know, there's an interesting annual conference that happens in Singapore every year called the World Architecture Festival. Happens in November every year, and you know, 4,000 or 5,000 architects come together, all the high design architects. And they have competitions on design, and Frank Gehry and others. You know, he's 90 something years old now, but their designs are in there, and they catalog, they photograph, they put all of this information out about the winners of all of these designs. And if you go back to my example I used on the structural engineering, let's take all of the design award winning homes that have ever been done in the history of mankind. And let's build a database on the characteristics of those design award winning homes. Tell me color, tell me style, tell me layout, tell me, you know, how the judges' comments were about those designs. Put it all in a database and ask a quantum computer to give you 10 examples. And in 10 minutes, they'll give you 10 examples. Now, will there be a role for architects and engineers? You know, this is one I'd like to debate forever. And I'm sure the people that are listening to this are listening to me and saying, you're out of your mind, Frank, because this, you know, there's always a role for human judgment in design. And I think there will be a role, but think about how we're going to enhance design. If I could provide you within 10 minutes, 10 alternative designs for a project that you could physically examine and enhance with your own judgment. You're not going to need 200 people in a firm to create those designs. You need a computer, a quantum computer, to spit out more and more options for you to pick. Now, the danger with the professions is, can't the owners do the same thing? Couldn't a client
Right.
pick 10 designs and say, let's follow up on this one. Let's make this one better. So we may eliminate some of the interim people, the people that are in the middle between the client with the money who's going to do a project and the contractor that's going to build it. In fact, we're going to see, one of my predictions is an explosion in design build, where design builders start to use these tools to almost replace the architects and the engineers.
Frank, that's an interesting comment because today, you know, if you look at the industry, how it functions, doing a digital twin, for example, for construction is very rarely done. It's typically done post construction for maintenance of buildings and things like that. That's what it's used for. And you know, there's a school of thought that says if we could do this before construction, you could literally have the entire project schedule be built out of that and have a very efficient way of constructing. And what you're saying, but there's some good. I feel like I'm hearing a little bit of a conflicting statement here, which is one, we are slow to adopt technology, but at the same time, quantum computing can obviously hyperscale that, go really fast, right? But there is an element of the human nature here, right? Why we haven't adopted technology in this industry is really comes down to people. And part of me is saying, I'm listening to this prediction. I'm saying, okay, you know, 2030 is 6 years away. I just looked at my clock down there. It's 6 years away. Um, but is this still people dependent? How are you seeing the human force trying to adopt to that in 6 years?
Well, that's a very good point, Ajoy. You know, the interesting thing is we're looking right now and we're statistically examining a whole bunch of firms that weren't around 5 years ago, 6 years ago, staffed by very young architects and engineers. And I think the youth of our professions is much more adaptable to change and much more adaptable to using these tools than the seniors in our circles. The seniors are skeptical and slow to adapt. The youth are just embracing this, especially after COVID sent everybody home to work with all the new tools, all the new technology. Many firms led by people in their 20s and 30s are not adapting old ways. They're just embracing new ways. Now that's one point. Another point is, why is our profession so stuck on the old stuff and not adapting new technology? Well, new technology is not cheap. It's very expensive. So when we start to think about adapting quantum computing, adapting, high levels of artificial intelligence packages and software, the companies like Amazon or others that are adapting artificial intelligence are spending millions on adapting it to their use. Architects and engineers are not that economically viable to do that. They don't have the kind of surplus funds that, they tend to eat what they kill, as opposed to storing major amounts of retained earnings to invest in future technology. So we have the economics working against it, and the fact that the older people are less embracive of change. They're fearful of it, as opposed to being, embracing of it. They see it as a danger, not as a tool to really increase their productivity.
And it's interesting you say that. So there are two things I see, right? One is I feel there's going to be a brain drain coming to this industry over the next 6 to 10 years, right? There are people who are going to be retiring, and then there are these kids coming out of college, and there's going to be a gap between in the knowledge that people in this industry have institutionalized, right? So I feel like what you're saying is almost there's going to be a force to innovate, because if they don't know how to do things that have been done for the last 100 years, how will they build buildings in the future? And that's going to have to they're going to have to figure it out. And we know we're not going to stop building. I mean, that has to happen. So I feel like there's a force of innovation that's going to happen regardless. And is that
Well,
kind of
let me go back to history, Ajoy, because I'm an old fart here. Back in the 1980s, when we started our computer tech show in the architecture and engineering space, I remember one architect sitting me down when I was in my early 30s and saying, "Frank, you don't understand. Architects will never use computers to do design. Computers can never be used in any productive way to do design. So there's no way that a technology show in computer technology will ever service architects." Well, and then came Autodesk in 1985, one of our first exhibitors. And by 1990, the entire world had changed in the architecture and engineering business. So within 5 years, back in the 80s, the entire profession put into use a productivity tool to enhance drawing of actual drawings. They didn't change the output. The output was still physical paper drawings. They weren't doing anything on laptops yet. But within 5 years, Autodesk went crazy. They became a multinational company servicing all the architects. So can this technology be adapted? Absolutely. But I think what you're going to see is it's going to be more easily adapted by larger firms and by younger firms who are just starting out. Those firms that are smaller, led by us old farts, are going to be less adaptive. And I think the pressure will come from, follow the money is one of my favorite sayings. Follow the money. When you
Yeah.
start seeing a couple of firms that are really using new technology to be very productive, then everybody will start to hop on the wagon. And my belief is that's going to come more from the design build environment than it is from the pure design environment.
It's interesting because one of the things you said there, right, is it's access to technology is going to, in large part, dictate how or what you're able to produce, right? So, for example, these tools, we went from pen and paper, or we went from chisel and hammer to abacus to pen and paper and now to AutoCAD and now AutoCAD, right? And paper be damned, to your point about your training earlier on, is those that have the capital funds to get access to the technology that enables this new world or this new wave, if you would. Do you see them standing on their own and all of the independents or the old farts or whoever it is in the pool here are coming up and trying to do their own thing, the Frank Gearys of the world who are expiring in terms of the big celebrity architect, and it's just like the automobile manufacturers now, where every car kind of looks the same because they're putting the same stuff into the same sort of software and it's pumping out the same sort of design, aerodynamic, fuel efficient. Well, it's got to be electric now. Do you see that happening? I guess it kind of touches on that individualism question we asked before, but technology, when it's new, isn't accessible to everyone. AI 20 years ago was very, very much a capital intensive game. AI today, if you got $20, you have the same capability as they do with buildings with names on the front, on the top of them, right? How does that play into it, Frank?
Well, you're hitting right on it, John, because about a month ago, we did a little survey of large design firms and asked them what their AI policies were. And we had about 112 firms or something like that send us their written policies on AI. And it actually shocked us because we started to see some of the larger firms investing millions in AI. And we didn't know that was happening. And they didn't want to really tell people they were doing it. Because if you can get a secret advantage in the market, you're not going to kind of broadcast it to your competitors. So suddenly we have this book with, and it's published now, anybody can get it, of large firm AI policies. What are they doing? What are they using it for? What are they allowed to use it for? What are they not allowed to use it for? What are the rules in terms of using it? And the largest of the design firms in our industry are already investing. Now, the question is, will that homogenize design? I'm going to give you an example of one market. Let's take the multifamily housing market right now. Right now, it's a hot market. It's still very busy. Housing's in demand. And I would like you to take a look, if you can, or anybody that's listening to this podcast, go out and take a look at all of the multifamily housing projects that are being done across the United States. Let's not even go globally. Across the United States, and tell me how different they look. There might be 3 different facades, there might be 3 different layouts, but by and large, they pretty much look all the same. It's what I call the Motel 6 syndrome.
Yep.
Every Motel 6 looks the same.
Every single one. That's a good point.
So, and even, John, you're from South Africa. You go to South Africa or you go to Australia. I was on the board of an architectural firm. And by the way, I didn't mention this, but I am an architect, licensed in New York State, fellow of the Institute. But, I was on the board of an architectural firm in Australia for 20 years. And they're in a multifamily housing business. And I used to criticize them all the time, saying that every single project looked the same. And, it was looking the same because the demand of efficiency to produce the building, to get it up and get it rented, drove them not to be creative. It drove them to be production. So it's going to depend. The ability of a client to spend more money slowing down a project to get unique design is what's going to allow those name architects like the Garys of the world to flourish. And that's always been there. There are artists that do great art, and they're poor and they do art, and it becomes the Picasso art of the world. And there will be architects that will survive in that arena. But the majority of the business is going to be driven by productivity, improved by AI, followed by quantum computing. It's going to be leaps and bounds of productivity improvement, which is going to even further shorten the design and construction cycle. So when you think about a project, you can get it occupied and used today, not 3 years from now.
I agree with that. That's something I am completely aligned with you on. The one thing that I do worry, though, is how long, because we always talk about how slow this industry is to adopt change, but a lot of that is also on the regulatory governing bodies that are slow to adapt to new ways of working, new technologies, new techniques, new materials, for example. So the will, the technology is there to go faster, do faster. Don't spend countless hours on something that we can use technology to get done in minutes, etc. But the regulatory bodies won't allow it yet because they haven't reviewed policy with that. When is that gap going to change? I mean, no, never's the easy answer, right? But how do we tighten that?
Well, I'm going to give you an analogy on that one. I'm a sailor and a boater. I have been my whole life. And take a look at the America's Cup. The America's Cup yachts are now literally airplanes flying on the water with
Right.
technology. But what we have in our industry right now is an America's Cup yacht called AI and quantum computing coming down the line. But we have a massive ship's anchor attached to the America's Cup boat, and it's called building officials, and it's called code enforcement. And that code enforcement, it takes decades to change it. Now, the hope that I have is that the people who replace the existing code officials will have grown up with technology, will embrace technology, and will see that it's important for them to update the codes to reflect what's available in the marketplace. But that's going to take a long time. I don't predict by 2030 that that'll be changed. It might be 2050. Okay. I mean, think about how tough it is right now just to get the electric grid in place to have electric cars refueled. And it's just mind-bogglingly slow because we have codes, we have restrictions, we have use restrictions on where you can put electric charging stations. The technology's there. We could put electric charging stations every place today,
Correct.
but everything's slowing it down in our legal infrastructure. So I think there are a few real big obstacles to our professions adopting this. One is the code enforcement. Number two is the economics. And number three are the old farts still running firms. So, and maybe in that order, because I think there are an awful lot of old farts who think young. They think in a very young way. So I'm not going to criticize. I'm not going to put them all in one pot. Okay. One thing that the firms listening to this could do right now is be sure you put a 25-year-old on your board, so you get young thinking into the
Solid point.
strategic part of your company. Get somebody. And by the way, I've said in my books for years that the next partners in firms will be your CIOs, your chief information officers. They will be owner partners in your firms. Otherwise, your technology expert can walk out the door if they're not an owner in your firm. And that's going to be very dangerous. So
Very interesting.
that's another thing that will change.
Very interesting. Frank, this has been an amazing conversation, very thought provoking. Some ideas over there that I wish I had more time to kind of push you on this. And what we'll do is we'll probably have you back here. I do want to push you on a couple of thoughts that you've exposed over here. But with that, we'll wrap up. But I do want to ask you, can you give our audience a final thought, something to walk away with, to think about as they listen to this podcast, to think about, to mull over around just the era that we are living in, the era of AI and quantum computing coming in front.
Well, let me bring it right back to what we do today. I mean, one of the things that I do a lot of right now, and I'm still doing an awful lot of it, over the course of the last 50 years of our business, we've probably helped firms write 1,000 strategic plans in design firms. So we go into a firm and help them facilitate their strategic planning. Now is the time when the subject of technology needs to be at the forefront of your strategic plan. And I think, you got to bring it right back to today. Not every firm is going to embrace technology, but it needs to be discussed as part of your strategic plan. And even if you're going to say something as simple as, what is our competition doing with technology? And how are we going to combat that or embrace that in the next 5 years in our own planning? Because our businesses are at risk of going away if those with technology can do things better and faster than we can do it right now. So I would implore all the people listening to this podcast, as you do strategic planning, be certain you get input on the current status of technology and what it's going to do to your practice, not to the industry, to your practice today. That's the kind of my parting message to people in strategic planning.
Spot on. Absolute words of wisdom. Frank, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and guaranteed to have you back on again, 100%. Thank you so much for your
Well,
time.
thank you, John. Thank you, Ajoy. And keep in touch. If anybody wants to get a hold of me anytime, yeah, feel free to give them my address or emails or anything. Love to have you.
Absolutely. You heard it here, folks. We'll be posting the address in the comments section so you can all go and visit Frank. Please subscribe. We have the QR code on the top of the screen over there that you can scan for your convenience to subscribe to us. And again, keep the comments going. We are here to serve the interesting tidbits of conversation and tidbits of information that you're requesting from us. So keep it going. And until next episode, Ajoy, as always, a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much. And Frank, thank you once again. This has been such a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, guys. Nice to chat with you.